So what we're going to go over today is the proposed budget process in the DRA's tax rate setting portal. It's a relatively quick presentation, and we'll go over a couple different things. The first is the proposed budget interface itself, so where you're actually going to be doing your work. I'll go over the process of creating articles from scratch or importing articles. We'll take a look at proposed appropriations and revenues, the article details. If you're an SB2 community, I'm going to be covering the default budget, which is part of the proposed budget process. We'll talk a little bit about pre-review and how that works. We'll go over the submission of the prior year information and the supplemental schedules, which again are only for SB2 communities and some school districts. And then I'll talk about submitting the proposed budget and finalizing everything. One thing to note, I didn't get a chance to check and see if anyone here was from a city, but most cities, instead of calling them warrant articles, in the portal, they're called resolutions. They behave exactly the same. The process is exactly the same. It's just a different name. So warrant articles for most of you, and for cities, whenever you hear that, just imagine that I'm saying resolutions. So one good thing is that for 2021, there are no changes to this process. There is definitely more than enough going on in the past year. The DRA held off on a few minor changes, and as far as I'm aware, there have been no legislative changes. So for those of you who have gone through the proposed budget process in prior years, everything's the same. So just in case we have some new users, I'm going to talk a little bit about the tax rate setting process as a whole. It starts off at the beginning of the year with the drafting of your warrant articles. And it's those warrant articles that become your proposed budget. So that's your 6 or your 7 series. That proposed budget goes to annual meeting, and the proposed appropriations are what become your voted appropriations. So that's your 2 series form. And then later on in the year, you have the ability to revise the estimated revenues from your proposed budget and submit them. That's your 4 series, so your 434 or your 24. And then it's those voted appropriations and the revised revenues and the valuation of your community that go into the tax rate setting calculation itself. So they basically look at how much money you've voted to spend. They look at your estimated money coming in from non-property tax revenue sources. And then they look at the total assessed valuation of your community. And from that, that's where you get your actual tax rate. After the end of the year, you're going to be filing your MS 535. This is a financial report of your actual expenditures and actual revenues. And what we're going to be talking about today is just the proposed budget part of the process. So just the drafting of the warrant articles and then the submission. One question I got is, will the slides be available later, or should you take detailed notes while I talk? The way the presentation is set up, I can't really distribute the slides because they're not individual slides, but I am recording this session and I will send out a YouTube link to the recording afterwards. So let's start with the budget interface. The budget interface itself can be accessed by clicking the budget tab or by clicking continue next to budget home. And they both take you to the same place. So this is the budget tab. I know that I am in the drafting part of this process because I have that big red bar at the top that says warrant drafting. And if we had any warrant articles in the system already, we would see them in this table. So right now we don't have any warrant articles. We just have the empty table and a couple of buttons down at the bottom. So those buttons allow us to either create a new warrant article from scratch, import our articles from last year to give us sort of a starting point, Or if we're an SB2 community, we can start on our default budget. So we'll start with creating an article from scratch, since this is probably the most common thing that you'll be doing. So if you click that Create Warrant Article button, you're going to be presented with a multi-step process. And it's broken into sections to make it pretty easy. And it'll sort of guide you through the process of creating the article here. You start off by selecting a warrant article category. And once a category has been chosen, you have the ability to select a type. And it's this category and type that control the suggestions for the warrant article language and whether or not it's a monetary article. So we picked our category as individual. We're going to go in and here we'll just select equipment purchase. And then once I pick this type, you'll get some additional steps that appear below. So here I'll go in and I'll enter my number and purpose. The purpose is sort of just think of it as sort of a chapter title. It's just a few words describing what the article is for. And then below that, I'm responsible for entering my total proposed appropriations and my total estimated revenues. And then what you'll see down at the bottom is a DRA template language prompt. And if you check this box, the system's going to give you some warrant article language to start with. And what you can see here is we've got some suggested language, and it has two placeholders that I would go in and edit later after I've created the article. And all of this template language can be edited after the article's been created, so I'll show you that as well. Once I'm happy with everything, I can go ahead and click Generate. The portal is going to create the article and then take me right to the article details. One thing I will mention here is that once I create the article, I can't change the category or the type. And that's because the category and the type control some things behind the scenes. So if we were to allow you to go in and change that, it could potentially mess up some of the business logic that you don't see going on. So if you're in a situation where you accidentally create an article with the wrong category or wrong type, you'll just have to delete that article and then recreate it with the correct one. So before I get into warrant article details, I'll talk about how importing articles works. We saw that import button at the bottom of the budget tab. If I click that, it's going to copy all of my articles that I had last year into the current year. It'll tell me the date that I actually hit the import button, and the import button itself will disappear. In order to re-import, so let's say you go in and you edit a bunch of things and you realize you want to start over, you need to delete all of the warrant articles you've worked on so that there's nothing in the table, and then the system will allow you to use that import process again. And the reason it's done that way is we don't want you accidentally duplicating imported articles or losing some of your changes. So it's a very deliberate process to be able to re-import. The articles are imported with the article type, the purpose, the language, the number, and the appropriations and revenues that you had last year. One thing that they do not have when you import them is they don't have the total appropriations and total revenues filled in. And that's so that you're required to go in and review all of the imported articles before you submit your proposed budget. And it's just a way of making sure you don't accidentally submit a proposed article that existed last year, but that you're not using again this year. And I'll show you what that looks like in the warrant article details screen. So to get to an individual warrant article view, all you have to do is click the red arrow next to the article. Oops, to move forward here. So you click the red arrow next to the article and it's going to take you to the actual details. And so here we're going to take a look at just the operating budget article for this particular town. So this is the operating budget article for Newport. Now, operating budgets are their own warrant article. For some of you, you may have multiple warrant articles that constitute the operating budget. And this particular article was imported from last year. So we see up here at the top, we have two red boxes, and it's basically saying, well, it's brought everything in. So it's brought in my my itemized appropriations and revenues, and we can see the calculated totals here, but it didn't fill in those top proposed appropriations and offsetting revenue boxes. So that's what I was talking about, where it won't bring the totals over, and it forces you to go through and review everything. So all those red boxes are indicating is that there's a mismatch between the totals and the calculated totals. And we'll see kind of how that works as we go through this. Below that, I have some warrant article language. So this is what I could go in and edit. And again, this is brought in by that import process. And then below the language itself, we have the pre-review panel down here at the bottom. And I'll talk about pre-reviews separately. All the way at the bottom of the screen, this is where you'll probably be spending most of your time. This is where we have all of our account codes with our appropriations and revenues. This table is broken out into two tabs, appropriations and revenues. They're two separate sections. And on the left side of each section is the categories for the various account codes. And on the right, the account codes within the category. So right now we're looking at the account codes for general government. Now within this table, you're going to have a couple different columns. Some of you will have a budget committee column. Some of you will have a select board column like we see here. Some communities will have both. So in this case, Newport only has a board of selectmen. So there's only two columns we have to deal with: the amount that the board is recommending for each account code and the amount that they're not recommending. So it's these fields where you're going to enter your appropriations or revenues. Now, once you've gone through and you've added a bunch of appropriations and revenues, you can hit the blue recalculate button. And what it's going to do is it's going to total up everything and then bring you back to the top of the warrant article. So it's going to run through those totals. That's the calculated recommended amount that you see here and the calculated estimated revenues amount. And if those calculated amounts match the totals that you originally told the system, the box is going to turn green. So both appropriations and revenues have to be green in order for you to ultimately submit your budget. So we'll say that we're happy with this article. We've itemized everything. At this point, I can hit save and next. That's going to save my progress and go to the next article in my list. I can hit save and home. That would save all my changes and bring me back to my budget tab. Or if I decided I'm not using the article this year, I want to get rid of it, I simply hit the delete button. When you hit the delete button, it's going to prompt you to make sure that you actually want to delete the article, and then it will remove it from your list. So now a little bit about the default budget. There's a button at the bottom of the screen that allows you to create the default budget itself. Now again, this is only for SB2 communities. When you click that button, it's going to create what looks like a warrant article record in the table. It's not a warrant article, it's the default budget, which is a totally separate thing, but this is just an easy way to display it to you and to give you access to it. Now the default budget, if you're an SB2, has to be completed and submitted before you can move forward and submit your proposed budget. So it's part of the process and it's a requirement to finalize things. When you do submit it, it's going to say final over in that right column, and you'll see true/true. So that indicates that I've submitted my default budget and that all the values checked out. The default budget itself includes all of the appropriations from your approved prior year operating budget articles and any collective bargaining agreement articles that you had. It brings all of that forward into this account codes table that we see here, but it gives you the ability to go in and edit values if you need to. So what we see here, it's just appropriations. There are no revenues on the default budget. This is where you'll see the breakdown of account codes. So it's going to be broken out in the same categories that you saw in our other warrant articles. And there's a couple columns here that we're going to be responsible for reviewing. The first is the prior year adopted operating budget. And again, this gets populated for me based on the numbers from last year. I can edit these if I find an error. There are situations where something might have happened during the year last year, or perhaps a warrant article was disallowed that might have affected how accurate these numbers are. If that looks good, you have a column for reductions or increases and any one-time appropriations. From those three values, the system's going to calculate your actual default budget. And it's worth noting that if you do have to make any edits or you do have any one-time appropriations, you'll have to provide a reason. And this is just explaining to your advisor why the numbers changed. Once I'm happy with my default budget, I go down to the bottom and I hit submit. And what this does is this finalizes the default budget for me, and it lets me proceed through the rest of the process. So the next piece to talk about is pre-review. Now, at this point, I have all my articles drafted. So all my language is in, all my proposed appropriations are in. At this point, I can go down and I can hit that request pre-review button. Now, this is kind of a one-time thing. The DRA recommends that you get all of your articles into the system, get everything entered to the best of your knowledge, and then request pre-review. And what this does is this sends a notification to your advisor. It asks them to go in and review your work. And they have the ability to provide feedback. And I'll show you how the feedback works here in the system. One thing I will say is that pre-review is entirely optional, but highly recommended. If you don't go through the pre-review process, it's possible that you may have errors in warrant article language, which could cause an article to be disallowed, for instance, at annual meeting after the DRA reviews it. So again, this is a highly recommended step. So the pre-review panel, so you request pre-review, and what you'll see after your advisor completes the review, you'll get a notification, you'll log into the system, and you're going to see some new icons show up. So the first icon is this envelope with an exclamation point. This indicates that there are comments from your advisor that you haven't read yet. A green check mark indicates that your advisor reviewed the article and signed off on it, basically saying it's fine, or you made the corrections that they asked for. That yellow icon indicates that one or more issues still remain. So the pre-review panel that we saw earlier functions a bit like a chat room. So where we're at in the process right now is I requested the pre-review. My advisor looked over this article and has flagged it and said, well, there's a required change, something I need to do. So I'm going to click the green plus icon over here just to expand it and see what my advisor is asking me to do. And we'll see here that the advisor says that my article language needs revision. Now at this point, that's not a lot of details. So I'm going to click add reply. And I'm going to ask exactly what they are trying to tell me here. What's the change that I need to make? So I enter my reply. It's just like responding to an email. I hit save down at the bottom. And what it'll do is it'll post my reply right under the original required change comment. And what we can see is my advisor can now respond to that. So it works exactly like an email thread. So here my advisor responds with that I need to review paragraph 1. There's something wrong there and I should probably talk to our attorney. So let's say I go through, my attorney reviews the language, we make the change, we revise it, we save it, I reply back to my advisor that I've revised it. And at this point in time, the advisor can review your changes and they can either sign off on it or they can ask you to take additional actions. So what we see here is I have that green completed check mark. That's just telling me that my advisor was happy with what I did. So at this point in time, all my appropriations and revenues are in. Everything says true and true over on that raise and offset column. All of my icons are now green check marks. I have no unread messages. So I've addressed everything. At this point in time, I'm ready to go to the next step. So down to the bottom of the page, the next step is to click the View Calculate Budget. And what this is going to do is it's going to gather up all of my proposed appropriations and revenues. So it's going to total everything up and present me with an aggregated view of my proposed budget and my prior year numbers. So clicking that button takes us to this page. I have 2 green boxes at the top. That's basically saying that all my warrant articles were filled out correctly. If I had a red box up here for either raise amounts or offset amounts, I know that there's an error somewhere in my appropriations or revenues that I have to go fix. So this is the same warrant article table that we've seen before. Account codes table. It has a couple extra columns here. The first is a warrant article number column, which tells me which articles are contributing to that particular account code. I then have a column for my actual expenditures for the prior period, my appropriations for the year ending. So basically, I'm going to be entering my actual numbers if I know them. I'll be entering my original appropriations. And then we see over here in these 2 columns, the totals from this year's proposed budget. So those aren't editable. So all I'm really responsible for here is the actual expenditures and the appropriations. Now, some towns and villages will have this automatically populated because chances are you might already be working on your MS 535, which again is your report of your actual numbers from last year. Those that don't have it automatically populated, which includes school districts, you're going to have to go in and manually enter these numbers because we won't have them yet from your 535. Once everything looks good, down to the bottom, I can go ahead and click Continue to Step 2, Finalize. For most of you, this is the last step. This brings you to a page with a confirmation button to finalize. But if you're an SB2, you have one more thing to do, and that's the Supplemental Schedule. So this is specific to MBA or SB2 communities with budget committees. This is your 10% schedule. So most of you, if you're within an SB2, you'll recognize this. So this has all of your exclusions, your collective bargaining agreements, water and waste treatment facilities, and so on. And ultimately, at the bottom, it calculates your maximum allowable appropriations that can be voted at the annual meeting. So that's really what the bottom line number is telling you. So in this case, I would fill everything out if I was an SB2, and I'd have that green finalized budget at the bottom. So again, if you're not an SB2, you won't have this schedule, you'll just have the finalize button. Click the finalize button and you're done. That's pretty much the end of the proposed budget process. So there's a couple things I want to touch on And these are just sort of frequently asked questions or things that people run into. I mentioned this briefly, but some communities have operating budgets that are split into multiple articles and they're voted on separately. In this case, there's a type of operating budget article called operating budget by function. And you can have as many of these as you want. And the system is smart enough to know that if you have, let's say, half a dozen of these operating budget by function articles, that they all constitute your actual operating budget together. Warrant article numbering actually comes up a lot, which might seem surprising. You can use any combination of letters and numbers. I've seen communities that put the year, a dash, and then a warrant article number. There are communities that use A, B, C, D, and so on, or other indicators for these warrant articles. You can use anything you want. The portal is going to sort them in alphabetical order on the website and in the reports. So the only thing we recommend is that if you're using numbers and you have single digit articles, 1 through 9, just put a 0 in front of them. And this ensures that those single digits appear before 10, 11, and so on. So it all gets sorted in the correct order. And that's just a byproduct of how the system tries to handle all the different ways that people number their articles. Another question we get a lot is, do I have to enter my non-monetary articles? Technically, I should say statutorily, no, but the DRA highly recommends it. Adding your non-monetaries to the system means that they will be preserved in the system. They will show up in any reports, so they'll serve as sort of a historical record. They can be imported next year, which can save you a lot of time. And if you have multiple users in the town, they'll all have access to those old non-monetary articles. So it is something, like I said, it's not required, but the DRA recommends it just as sort of a bookkeeping measure. And like I said, we get this question a lot as well about whether or not pre-review is required. The system will not force you to go through pre-review, but the DRA recommends it. And what you'll find, especially with the more senior advisors, if you're working with Michelle or Jamie, for instance, if you skip the pre-review process and your advisor later finds an error, they might bounce you back to the warrant article drafting piece and have you correct that. So they're going to do their best to prevent you from going to annual meeting with a problematic article. But again, pre-review will sort of save you that runaround, so that you're not wasting any time when you're going to get signatures and your advisor is hounding you to make a change. So again, entirely optional, but highly recommended. This comes up a lot as well. Let's say you're running your proposed budget report in the system. You're printing it out so that you have something to look at, and you're actively revising your warrant articles. If you make changes to the warrant articles, you need to hit that View Calculate button at the bottom of the Budget tab to update the report. And the draft version of the report will remind you. That's what that red box is at the top. It's basically saying that if you've made changes, they won't be reflected on this report until you hit View/Calculate. Let's say you go through the whole process and you get to that last page and there's no green Finalize button. That probably indicates that you have a standard user account, because only municipal administrators can ultimately submit the proposed budget. So if you're missing that button, there's nothing on that screen. You have to track down the administrative account holder and have them submit it for you. I'm just going to skip this next slide because that's pretty obvious. If your reports say draft on them, that just indicates that you haven't finalized everything. So this is the last one, and this is probably the biggest. It's the most common support ticket that we get. You submit everything and you find an error. So what exactly do you do about it? Just contact your advisor, send them an email or call them. They have a tool on their end that lets them roll you back so that you can go in and make that correction. It happens all the time. People forget warrant articles, they enter an appropriation number incorrectly, or they make a mistake on language. So just reach out to your advisor. If you can't get a hold of them, you can get in touch with our support team, and we'll reset you so that you can go and make that correction and then refinalize. So just some additional resources. Again, your municipal advisor is a great resource for statutory questions or municipal finance questions. You know, if you're not sure what account codes to use, for instance, reach out to them. And your individual advisor will have their contact information right on your home tab. So that yellow box at the top right corner, that'll give you their direct line and their direct email. If, let's say, you run into a problem with the portal itself, maybe you hit an error because these are computers and computer software has problems from time to time. Or let's say you know what you need to do, but you don't know how to do it in the portal, get in touch with our support team. And we've got 2 phone numbers here. We have our toll-free number and we also have our local number since we are based out of New Hampshire. You can drop us an email, support@axiomnh.com, or you can go directly to our support website. And the easiest way to access all that is just to hit the help link in the top right corner. That'll bring you to the support portal. From there, you can access all sorts of help documentation and short videos, very similar to this webinar, that break down every step of the process for you. And there's also a button there to send in a support ticket. Whether you send an email or you send a support ticket, it's exactly the same thing. Everybody on our support team gets an alert. We're typically available from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern by phone. So if anything is urgent, just give us a call. And then through email or support tickets, we respond pretty much 7 days a week, practically all hours, because we know that you guys have a lot of deadlines. There's a lot of things that you have to get done. So we try to make ourselves available to help you with that.